How are you feeling on this?
I mean, not good. I was just talking to him. Now he's dead.
It's the hardest way to lose a patient. Always hurts.
Especially when it's your fault.
This was not your fault. This was nobody's fault. No doctor on the planet could have caught this. Listen, it sucks, but today was this guy's day to leave this mortal coil. 150,000 people die every day in the world, and you got one of them. But you learn to live with it, you learn to accept it as much as your own mortality and find balance if you can.
You found balance.
No, not even close. But you keep trying, which is all you can do. You're doing great. Whitaker, just, hang in there.
Hello, all. Welcome back to What's On Tonight, a podcast with elaborate, quirky, and unpredictable conversations about TV, movies, and more. I'm Becky.
And I'm Mandy.
Tonight, we are covering The Pitt, Season 1, Episode 3, titled 9 a.m. Please note, this is a spoiler-filled podcast, so if you haven't watched the episode and don't want to be spoiled, no biggie, just come back and check us out after you finish watching. So Episode 3 was written by Joe Sachs and R. Scott Gemmell and directed by Damian Marcano. Mandy, would you please tell us what this episode is about?
Mara does her best to keep Whitaker on the right track. A teen overdose sparks conflict in the ER.
Did it ever? I have so many thoughts on those scenes. I'm very excited to get to them. First impression, I thought it was a good one. I love how they're doing the continuation of the storylines, and the way through those storylines, we get continued connections that grow between the staff. And it's a very slow burn, but I think it's all going to pay off at the end, that we get little hints here and there of the characters, the way they're dropping little hints. Dr. McKay, we get just a smidge towards the end that gives us a little insight into the possibility of her ankle bracelet. I think the pace fluctuates nicely between the heavy and then those brief moments of, and I say winky fingers calm because I know it's not super peaceful, but a little bit of calm. But one thing I noticed in this episode that I think is absolutely brilliant is the absence of that dramatic music that flows throughout. I kept wondering why this felt so real world to me, and they don't use that over dramatic music throughout the whole episode. So you're literally, I'm not really sure how to phrase it, but I don't know. I just think it's neat. I think it's interesting. And I think it adds to the real feeling that you are in the hospital, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I didn't notice it. I didn't notice that the music was less, was it less than like the last two episodes?
Yeah. Well, like when you open up and we're going through the scenes with Dr. Whitaker and the moments with the parents and the siblings, they don't have this score of music playing, that we're relying solely on the actors, the sounds of the machines in the hospital, the murmurs in the background. It's real world. It's not, they're doing such a great job of building all of this tension and anxiety and sadness without this massive score, which is what made ER so great, was the score added to the drama of what was going on. But this show, they're not relying on that, and it's impressive that it's paying off.
I'm really impressed that you noticed that. I did notice in the beginning, I didn't think about it as having been carried out throughout the entire episode, but now that I think back on it, you're absolutely right. And that's kind of one of the things that I had a hard time articulating about what I wanted from this show versus a typical network medical drama, is that I often think that the score, while it might be effective for television, to me, it generally takes away from the grittiness or, the ability to think of it realistically. So I had noticed that at the very beginning. That I didn't know. What I didn't know is had they started doing that the episode before. Because when it came in and it was like we were already in the thick of the shift and you didn't have that intro music at all, I did notice that, and I really liked that. I just didn't think about it having carried all the way through the episode. So that's just a good call on your part, Becky. I'm impressed.
Thank you. What were your first impressions?
Oh, I liked this episode a lot. I think it was hard for me to take notes because as far as like the human drama of everything, there were a lot of little moments here and there, but it really was more about just this dizzying, like following Dr. Robbie, room after room after medical emergency, medical emergency. I felt like I was one of those interns following him around, like, taking notes.
Yeah, it was exhausting. I was exhausted by the end of that episode. I get what you mean.
I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. Of all of the podcast episodes that we've done so far, both here and with What We Do in the Shadows, it was the hardest for me to really pin down everything that I wanted to talk about, if that makes sense.
It does. It does.
This episode 3 times. I watched it the first time just to get my general impression. And then I watched it last night again and trying to concentrate because of my whole face blindness thing on writing down the characters. And I made nicknames for most of them, by the way, and getting like who the actors were and things like that. So I could kind of like try to get it in my head. And so then I was like scrambling to rewatch just so that I could take notes like I normally do this morning because there's so much going on so quickly. So it's funny because I enjoyed it as much or more than a lot of the other episodes that we've done, but I had the hardest time pinning down like moments where I was like, I need to talk about that because it was more like I felt like I was in training.
Well, yeah, and I get you on that. And I felt the same struggle, but mine was more so because there was so much that I want to talk about. But it's like, we can't, do we want a 4-hour episode? So my hardest part was trying to condense thoughts.
We're gonna have a great chat. It was just a strange experience. Like normally I'm just sitting there like funny line after funny line after funny line. That was not this. There were funny lines, but it was more about like I was actively having to engage and pay attention to what was going on so that I would know, is this the dude that's coding? What's going on with those old people over there? It's just a lot, and it was great. I enjoyed it. This was much more what I was hoping for from this kind of medical show.
Awesome. I will say one of my best friends, Tanya, texted me that she finally going to give this a try. And it excited me because Tanya and I, Thursday nights, ER, that was our jam. I'd get off work, come to her house, and we would watch ER together. That was our thing. She's my ER girl. And she felt it was slow, but she likes it. And so I'm hoping she'll stick with it because if we can get her on for an episode, it would be so much fun to cover an episode of a medical drama with her starring Noah Wiley, because that girl knows how much I love Noah Wiley.
Yeah, that'd be like a little walk down memory lane.
A reunion. All right. So sorry, guys. Back to the show. So we open up where we left off with Dr. Whitaker trying to save Mr. Milton. And I love the choice of the director to give us that shot looking up at him. So you see the sweat and the anxiety and the still hoping he can save this man. I think it was a brilliant shot.
Yeah, he was just so terribly young looking right there. It was really something I noticed over and over again was how much of a baby face all of these interns are. Like they, as a mom to young adults now, it just is, there was a real dichotomy between the interns and the more experienced people in the ER. And there were a lot of moments where you see these interns going through things that everybody else has already seen a million times and their struggle to accept it. And I wanted to give them a hug in that moment.
Yeah. When Dr. Robbie has everyone in the room and they're reviewing the events of what they went through with his treatment. And it was so cool, the camaraderie that you felt, except for her. I really loved the camaraderie and the way everyone supported him, and especially the conversation that Dr. Robbie has with Dr. Whitaker once it's over. He did drop some real words of wisdom, and I love how Dr. Robbie is honest, but he doesn't sugarcoat, but he's not an asshole when he's giving directions to his students. But that awkward moment of him, I feel like it's me when I'm like crying, that meme where the girl's laying over the toilet and her friend's like, I don't know how to comfort. So she takes the broom and pats her and is like, there. That little awkward, him trying to comfort him with that pat on the shoulder. And then
it was very sweet.
It was so cute.
Look, she's not my favorite character, but I think that you're being a little bit hard on old Trinity.
I'm just telling you how I feel.
Well, okay. So dude
just died and she busts up in like, can I put a chest tube in this guy?
It's so frustrating because I don't want to get too far ahead and I don't want to take up too much time going down some weird rabbit hole. But one of the things that I felt through this whole episode, there were so many times I was writing down, this is me win. And I hate that because as a writer, you're not really supposed to insert yourself into everything. So I'm trying to experience it from a different level. But I think honestly, that's one of the great things about this show that makes up for all of the disgusting medical things that you're making me watch. By the way, I was cussing you at the chest incision.
Well, just know I'm chuckling every time I see a medical procedure come up.
I know you are. I don't want to make this all about me, but one of the things that's making me laugh and kind of also wince and also feel a lot of sympathy and empathy for is I think you're seeing here that there are a lot of neurodivergent people in the medical field. And a lot of that is because those type of people, I believe, are people who, whether it's through the way their brain is wired, nature, or nurture, the experiences that they've been through, a lot of times they have a hard time processing their feelings. And so they either don't know how to react in a situation with other people in a way that is empathetic because they've closed themselves off because of trauma, which is why I said I think you need to be a little bit nicer to Trinity, because we find out later in the episode she did not have the upbringing that.
Let me defend myself real quick. She is a great character. She adds something that this show needs. I don't argue about anything that you're saying. And there were fractions of a second where I felt just a little something for her. But then she opened her mouth and said something else. And I was like, I don't like you. I don't like her, but that does not mean I don't think she is a great character.
Right. She is kind of a dick. And that's why I said, there were several moments, not just her though. It's funny. I think maybe part of this is like, if you look at it in very extreme ways, Jihadi kind of reminds me of you 25 years ago, and Trinity kind of reminds me of me 25 years ago.
It's Javadi.
Is it Javadi? Think about the way we used to relate to each other when we first met. You were more sunny, optimistic.
Sensitive.
You were very emotional. You were much sweeter and kinder. And that is something I think that I have learned a lot from you over the years about being more empathetic and emotional and kind and compassionate. I was a lot more hard-nosed, and I could be very shitty to people like Trinity was. I'm probably still can, but I think I'm much more empathetic these days. But it wasn't because I was a bad person. It was because my life experiences had taught me I had to learn very early on in life. People leave you, that you can only depend on yourself. You cannot allow yourself to feel too much or too deeply because it will destroy you. And that was the trauma that I was bringing to my life that made me that way. I think you have moved a little bit further in that, toughening up your not giving everybody access to your emotions. And I have moved further towards understanding that just because this is how I experience life does not mean that that is everybody's experience. And sometimes the first thing that comes through your head is not what you need to blurt out in a certain situation. You may be able to cut your emotions off because you have taught yourself to do that, like a scar that heals over a wound, but not everyone has had that experience. Do you see what I'm saying? So
I completely agree with you.
There were moments where I thought she was just using Javadi, and when they had that conversation in the beginning where she was telling her she wanted,
and she was honest about it. She said she was.
But I still thought maybe she was being manipulative until I saw there were several other moments throughout the show where she tried to take the advice that Dr. Hill gave her to stop being such a dick. And I think that landed. And I could be wrong, because I feel like that this show is maybe setting us up for some logic traps for us to make certain assumptions and then blow those assumptions away.
Oh, I completely agree. And I do think that she is going to end up being more than the cocky,
right,
procedure hungry, manipulative person that they built her up to be. I don't doubt that.
Sometimes I see Jackson almost, because Jackson is very much like, not obviously been through the things I've been, but he is very like unemotional in the moment. And it's mostly because he can't. We're talking about my son. A lot of that is because he has such big feelings that he makes himself not feel them. And so sometimes he says some shitty things. As a mom, when those things come out of his mouth, I want to slap him. But then I take a deep breath and I try to think about why he is like that. And he has learned over the last year or so to really stop and process his emotions. And I can't tell you how many times, and just in the last week, where this is where the girlfriend is really helping out, I think, because I've seen several times in the last week where he has been like, ooh, the first thing that just came out of my mouth was a really crappy thing to say. And he'll come and he'll apologize to me and give me a big hug. And I guess that's what I'm saying, is that at the beginning of the episode with her, there were a couple moments where I was like, this girl is just not a good person. And by the way, so did Pretty Boy, had exactly basically the same reaction to somebody who is a human that's basically, they're dying. And he's like, yeah, we need the bed. We need the organs. Hurry up and move them out. At the end, you see that Doc Trinity goes back to Whitaker, and she gives him that moment of telling him, hey man, she says something shitty at first, but then she
ends it with something shitty.
No, she told him. She said something shitty.
Try not to kill anyone else.
Yes, she said, try not to kill anyone else. And then immediately was like, I'm sorry, this was not your fault. You didn't cause this. Not all of us have the luxury of saying that. So you can see that she did feel terrible the first time that went through her, and it was a trauma, and her assholeness is a trauma defense.
I believe I will get there, but right now, I don't want it to sound like I'm arguing with you, because I agree with what you're saying. And I did see those split second moments where I'm like, okay, she's not so bad, and there is a reason. I get that nobody walks in the door perfect, that you have to grow. And I hope that as the season progresses, they do reveal more that helps me have more empathy towards her. But right now, they haven't given me enough.
I hear you.
I do want to move on to Dr. King. I'm curious if you saw this. I think she's on the spectrum.
Yeah, I think a lot of these people are on the spectrum.
Well, no, I think
she was in there folding her arms and kind of humming and rocking. She was definitely appeared to be stimming to me.
I hope they don't Winky Fingers highlight it like, oh, we have a gay character on the show or something like that. I hope it just, like, they've naturally put the diversity in the show. I hope they naturally, something is said if she is on the spectrum, because I think that would be huge for people who are on the spectrum to see a young, obviously going to be very successful doctor. To see that kind of representation would be really cool.
Yeah. Well, again, that's kind of why I got off into that defensive Trinity, I think, is because, like, Dr. Robbie, it's hard for me to put into words because I'm not arguing with you. I'm trying to talk about one of the things that I truly am really enjoying about the show is I think being a doctor requires, they're all human. They all have their own different personalities. But I think overwhelmingly people who are brought to that profession, who feel that calling, they're not neurotypical. They're not. That doesn't necessarily mean, because it's a spectrum. I know what you're saying. You want to see, and it would be nice to see without it being like a quote unquote very special episode, that she is someone who is pretty high on the spectrum and officially diagnosed as being autistic perhaps, and that you're showing her living and processing and
thriving and growing. Yeah.
But I think a lot of these characters are on, and that's why I guess you and I see it differently as far as like some of these moments where they'd appear to be assholes. And I think that's why I kept like all these moments when Giovanni can't help being a know-it-all and says the wrong thing. I relate to that so much. When Trinity or Dr. Pretty Boy, who, by the way, I figured out who he reminds me of, and I'm just going to call him Uncle Doctor from now on.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yeah. When he says things that are callous, it's not okay. It's not a justification for any of that. I just recognize myself in that a lot. And maybe that's why I'm a bit defensive about it, because I do often feel like a square peg in a round hole. And it's not because of a lack of feeling. It's that I just seem to always be processing things or experiencing things differently, than other people around me. And a lot of times in crisis situations, I shut down my emotions and I become very, very logical, and I start looking for ways out of the crisis. So I think a lot of times throughout here, when we're seeing them as a staff, by the way, Dr. Hill, she's My Little Pony to me, because,
Who is Dr. Hill?
Yeah, Dr. Hill, that's the young girl.
Trinity?
No, not Trinity, the other one.
Dr. King?
Dr. King. Why have I decided she's Dr. Hill? I'm sorry. I have their notes here. Yeah, Dr. King. I've decided to call her My Little Pony. Because Meg the Stallion.
Oh, okay. That makes sense.
Anyway, even her, there are times where she says and does things that are incredibly awkward. And I just feel like if you were in a real hospital, there would be so many times throughout the shift where the vast majority of them are not incredibly overtly empathetic people. And we need that because they have to shut off their emotions so often because in a crisis situation you have to. And then what that leads to is you appearing to be a dickhead. When you become that clinical, whether it's through nature or nurture or both, it becomes harder to access those emotions when you need to be a normal feeling human being. And one of the things I think that is awesome about the character of Dr. Robbie is you can see that he is a fantastic teacher because he walks that line. And so many times throughout this episode, he has to take somebody aside and either say, you're being too much of an asshole, or you're not being an asshole enough, or you know what I mean, like not telling him to be an asshole. But like when he talks to Dr. Mohan and he's like, you may not be right for this job because at a certain degree, point, you have to get comfortable with the fact that you might kill somebody because we have to move quickly. You're wasting time and you're causing patient to not get care because you're spending too much time on individual patients. And that's probably a difficult line to walk between accessing your emotions over and over again in these crisis situations every day and shutting them off so that you can do your job.
Okay. I still don't like her, but I get what you're saying.
Well, I'm not just talking about her, though. So many of them said or did callous things or the wrong thing or the awkward thing, and they had to be brought back and learn from that moment. That is probably very realistic. I don't think it's because most doctors, though, are sociopaths, although there are some that are. I just think it's genuinely a very difficult thing to do.
And I agree. Complexity in the medical profession, be it personality, ability, it's part of, Naja would say, it's part of the psychology
Right.
of all of it.
Learning to walk that fine line between being empathetic, but not so empathetic that you let it destroy you, or you would let it allow you to become so involved with that patient that you're not ready to, especially in an ER situation, like when he told Mohan, maybe this isn't for you. That didn't mean there are not other medicines where being kind, as thorough as she's being.
Taking that time
Right.
is okay. And that's one of my notes is how impressive it was to watch him. That's where I was saying earlier, where he's honest and he doesn't sugarcoat, but he's not a dick about it.
Right. He's walking that line well.
Yeah, and he also allowed her to give her feelings and honesty about it. And he didn't shut her down. He didn't cut her off. I just like the way he did that. And I think he is the epitome of what I would want. And Noah Wiley's phenomenal acting. He brings it to life in such a way that is natural. I keep saying that, but I've also decided there are moments in this episode, some of the winky finger jokes, and I wrote the word levity so many times. So I made a note here that levity is my existential.
I want to go back to, I have a more nuanced view. Well, that's not the right word. I agree with you. I love that. I've had the same thought about Noah Wiley. Just seems very natural in this role. He really seems to embody this guy, and he gives him a lot of, depth and compassion. And I think, like I said, one of the things that I really took away from this episode, but this is why it was hard for me to take notes, because it was like the episode as a whole is what I was processing. It's like mostly the episode was just medical emergency after medical emergency. They weren't as much the human storytelling as the first two episodes, or building up or setting the backstory of all of this. It was more about the crises that were going on. But I also think Dr. Robbie, they may be setting us up to show that he has his own biases. He's fussing at Dr. Mohan about spending too much time with the woman who's experiencing a sickle cell crisis, but he is really spending a lot of time letting these people get used to the fact and taking up a bed to get used to the fact that their teenage son has just died from a drug overdose. If you think back to the first episode, there were a couple of different instances where you could see in a second where the pregnant doctor, what's her name?
Dr. Collins,
where he overshot her. Like she was in supposedly in control of certain situations. And it turned out fine. Like all of the instances where he did that, where he spoke over her, they turned out okay. But, you could get little glimpses of that she wasn't always exactly on board with where he was going. So I don't know. I think they may be setting us up to show that he's not always perfect either.
We're learning throughout this, and they're giving us two ends of a spectrum that I think are all going to meet in the middle and answer all of the questions. But you've got, like you said earlier, you've got your doctors and nurses who are perceived as one way, and then you've got your Dr. Robbie's and Dana, they're on one end, but as each episode unravels, they're giving us tiny little glimpses. The fact that we learn that Trinity has suffered trauma. I think as we go along, we're going to learn what that is. And it's going to bring her to that middle section where she's not an asshole, but she's also not.
Right. Nobody seems to be perfect in this, and they're showing the humanity.
Yes, and the same with Dr. Robbie, where we're seeing him, but there's no doubt there is an exhaustion and trauma behind that man.
Yeah.
And I hope as the episodes unravel,
it's costing him.
Yeah, and so that they're all going to meet in the middle and become a well-rounded group of people.
I'm afraid he's going to die of a urinary tract infection if he doesn't get to go piss soon.
God, let that man pee. That's one of my notes. All right, so I kind of was annoyed with Giovanni continuing to try to get the scoop on Dr. McKay. I mean, I want to know too, but it makes her seem a little less innocent, a little bit shady. I'd almost rather you just ask Dr. McKay, she knows she saw it. What's with that? And I also wonder, did Dr. Langdon, was he onto her and politely brushed her off? Or did he just not realize what she was trying to do?
I think he just didn't really register what she was. I didn't perceive it as anything shady. That and like the comment she made to the girl that had overdosed when she said she took half a Xanax, and she's like, that's not nothing. I felt like they were just trying to show how sheltered she was, that she genuinely just has so little real world experience that it's shocking to her that a young college student would take half a Xanax.
I also noticed when they were about to do that heart procedure, she was like, I'm going to go. And Dr. McKay's like, are you sure you don't want to see this? She's like, no, I'm good. And again, that's unraveling and unpacking little bits that adds to both of our opinions that she is not cut out for emergency medicine.
Yeah.
Curious to see where that goes. Dana's words to Dr. Langdon, you touched on it earlier, where he's like so ready to get this kid upstairs to free up a bed to save, to actually, as he said, actually help somebody else. And I thought about you because I basically said that last week. And then you were Dana. She's like, he is helping someone.
Yeah.
He's helping those parents.
Yeah.
They haven't let their heart accept it. And this is where I wrote again the word levity, his comment, which reminds me of our conversation sometimes when by the end of the conversation, one of us is depressed. I'm like, Jesus, it's 9:00. You're already bumming me out. I thought that was very funny.
Yeah.
And it made me laugh.
Yeah.
I also thought of us and our coverage of What We Do in the Shadows when he chose the puker talking about demon possession.
Yeah.
And I immediately thought of Laszlo and Andor's theory of human illness as actually being demon possession.
But that is another moment, too, where he's sitting there and he's trying to cherry pick what would be more interesting to him, that he is one of those characters that has to shut off his emotions, or maybe is just naturally not incredibly emotional and has to work harder. He's one that has to work harder to access his emotions. But he did. Like, when she got on his ass, you could see that he was like, yeah, I'm being a dick.
And that's another thing I like. Even the only interactions with Trinity that I felt okay. One, when Dr. Collins is giving her the business and she's like, you're right. I'm sorry. Like I said, split seconds of where I can see there is humanity in her. Anyway, I like that moment. So I want to spend just a minute talking about the two biggest stories. And I think the best part of the episode is the way they go back and forth between watching Dr. Robbie dealing with the OD kid. And I know he has a name and I should have written it down.
I don't remember.
Well, I'm just going to keep calling him OD kid and the siblings. It was a great contrast to show how they're not only on the parents and the siblings part, but also on Dr. Robbie, and how both are experiencing the same thing. Their son is dead and their father is dying.
Yeah.
And both are wanting to do everything they can to save their kid. But one side is doing it from there's got to be something else we can do. And the other one is, Kate used the word selfish, but she's still being selfish that she's not, she says it, I'm not ready to give up. You might be ready to give up on our dad, but I'm not. And then Dr. Robbie, the way he's empathetic in telling the family, giving them time to accept what's happening. And then the way he's handling these siblings who already know, but they're refusing to accept it. Am I making sense?
Yeah, that was a continuation of what we talked about last week, where they were showing the dichotomy between, the tragedy of losing a very young person and how, he understood that psychologically the parents, because that is a tragedy, and that they needed time to know that they had done everything. And then the other road that he's having to walk, where he's having to tell these, middle-aged people, which, again, the violence this show does to people who are pushing a little, just barely over 50, pisses me off. That is that is Mackenzie Aston. That is the dad there. That man is only 2 years older than I am. Remember the cute little dude that was on Facts of Life? That was him. Okay. You didn't need to make him look all liver spotted. And I'm not even going to get into the guy that was on the gurney that looked like he was 70 and they said he's 52. I Googled it. Noah Wiley is 53. How come he looks 10 years younger than that guy? Quit acting like 50 is old. That's what I want this show to do. Anyway, I don't even remember where I was at before that. Oh, yeah, the old people. Yeah, just the dichotomy of what psychologically he had to do to be stern, compassionate and kind, but firm with those parents, and compassionate and kind, but sterner with these people, because it's not a tragedy when a man, it's sad. It's sad for your family. It's hard for your family, but the reality is we all have to go sometime. And when you are at that point where you're a natural end of life, but that daughter loved her. I love that moment at the end where I stopped being mad at her at that moment.
Yeah.
When you could see that this genuinely all did come from a place of love for her dad.
Right. That's why I said I hate to say selfish after seeing.
It is, but we're all like that. It is, but it also gave me more, it made me feel more kindly towards her, to realize, who wouldn't feel like they wanted to do everything for their loved one, whether they're 18 or 80.
I loved the mom, and because, the brother accepted it early on, and he was like, okay, it's time to, and I'm glad he voiced it.
Yeah.
And backed up Dr. Robbie. He's like, he's dead. He knows it. I know it. Everybody but you knows it. But the way both the males were great, but I commend, and I should have written their names down, and I apologize that I didn't. The actress who played the mom and the actress who played the sister, both of them, you could see the moment it clicked that this is it for both of them. And I thought it was just beautiful the way they acted that out. Kudos to them.
Yeah.
That was a job well done.
Very well done.
I am very glad that Dr. Robbie and Dr. Langdon, whoever it was, I'm glad they didn't rush to get, it was Dr. Robbie, didn't rush to get the organ donor people down there to talk to the parents, which is what a lot of doctors would do.
Yeah.
I'm glad that he didn't, because he said, we're not there yet. They just realized their son is dead. Now they have to grieve that part before you go and say, hey, can we have his...
Right.
This show is portraying doctors handling things in such a different light, and I find it refreshing.
Yeah, it's a sucky one too, because there is a time constraint with that. I don't even, this is why I could never do that job, because at some point, I can't put myself in that. Literally can't put myself in the headspace of somebody who's lost a child. I can't go there, but I can't especially imagine moments later, someone coming and saying, and the bravery that so many do go ahead and make that choice in that moment. I'd like to think I could, but again, I just really literally cannot put myself, well, you know what I mean? You just can't put yourself in that mindset where you think about your child being in that. So, I really commend the parents that can make that choice, because I imagine it is way sooner every single time than you want to have that talk.
I knew as soon as Jenna, the other OD patient, came in that she was going to be a part of OD Kid's storyline. I have mixed feelings about the way the dad went off on her. It worked in a sense that it forced him to acknowledge his son is dead when he was yelling at her, and he's like, well, my son is dead. And I think it was believable that he would react like that because we've all seen grief come out as anger. So I felt that, but I also think it was played up just a little bit for dramatic effect. And I could have lived with it or without it, and they probably could have done it in a different way. It just felt a little too much for me, but I also get it because it gave us some breakthroughs that we needed. When she told him it was your son who gave those drugs, and then they sit and have that conversation with Dr. Robbie, this isn't fair.
I told you last week about my friend whose mom is a deacon and he's in local politics. They were raised in the church, deeply conservative, and then his sister and cousin OD'd in that apartment building with another guy. And I try to think, when it came out exactly what had played out, they did accept, and they were very honest about it because they wanted to be a warning to other people. But I got to imagine that was deeply shocking to the bishop to find out that her daughter and her niece had been doing anything like that. And I imagine there was moments where she was like, no way, that's just not possible.
No one is untouchable by drugs and alcohol, by drug use. It might be considered recreational. You might really have just wanted to take a Xanax to go to sleep, but there are risks that come along with that. And you don't have to be living in the streets. It's an every person problem. Yeah.
Kind of made me laugh about when Dr. Javadi was like shocked that she took half a Xanax. I mean, think back when we were 20 years old.
I was taking ecstasy.
Well, I didn't do that, but I was not. Yeah, you know, I didn't mean that like I was Pollyanna. I just meant that wasn't what I did. I didn't like anything that made me feel out of control. But yeah, I mean, not all the time. But you know, if you were hanging out with your friends or whatever, and somebody you didn't have to think that you were going to die from taking a Xanax.
Here's a story. I don't know if I've ever told you this story. Speaking of taking things that you don't, this is a great example. I was working at O'Charlie's in Johnson City, and it snowed one night, and our GM bought hotel rooms for us that was in the same parking lot so we could be at work the next day. And I had a horrible headache. And a friend of mine gave me, I was like, does anybody have anything for a headache? And she gave me a pill, and I took it. And I had a beer. We were in one of the rooms and we were talking. And I remember the bartender then walking in, and he's the one who started calling me Beck Dog. He walked in and he was like, Beck Dog. And the next thing I remember, I'm in my room in my pajamas, arguing with one of my roommates for the night about her inappropriate relationship with our married general manager, which, you know, in the restaurants happens all the time. Anyway.
Holy cow.
Fast forward, it gets worse. And I'm sorry if this is too personal, but I'm feeling powerful to even be able to share this on a podcast right now. Fast forward to a year and a half later. I am having a conversation with my roommate once we moved to Roanoke, Virginia, and we're working at O'Charlie's there. And he made a comment to me. He's like, I can't believe you had sex with so-and-so. And I looked at him. I was like, what? Because this is someone that had been hitting on me and hitting on me and hitting on me. And I was like, no, I'm not interested. I'm not interested. Shut him down every time. And everybody knew it. So he's like, no, you did.
Oh,
Come
my
to
God.
find out, I lost 3 hours of my life.
Oh, my God.
This man, I went to the girl who gave me the pill, and I asked her what happened. And she said that I was up stumbling around, and that he not grabbed me but he got me, and they let me leave the room with him.
Yeah, there's a word for that.
Yes. And it took me, so I drove, I got in my car at that moment at like 2:00 in the morning. I got in my car and I drove the 2.5 hours to Johnson City and stayed at mom's. And then the next day I went to O'Charlie's and I sat down with him and I was like, what happened? And he told me that, yes, we had sex. And I looked at him and I was like, I was obviously not in my right mind. You know, I'm not interested in you. What made you think that was okay? And then I said the words, you raped me. And he was like, no, I didn't. And anyway, moral of the story, that sucked. And that was my lesson, that I don't need to take unprescribed medications.
What did
Bad
she
things
tell
can
you it
happen.
was?
A Klonopin.
Was that what it was? I don't know anything about Klonopin.
I guess. I mean, I read up on it, and
The
it's
fact that
a
they
very
let you leave that room
powerful.
with him makes me want to
And it
go. And
wasn't just her. That room. It was
I'm
imagine
not
you're.
shocked. I'm horrified and angry and furious and want to do violence for you, but I'm not surprised. People are so reluctant to stand up for other people. That's heartbreaking. I'm so sorry that happened to you, Becky.
Well, me too. I really am. It's just a part of my life. I don't remember, and that I'll never get back. But
Well, I got roofied in Vegas a few years ago, but thank
yeah,
God Eric was with me. But the fact that happened in a room full of your friends and no one was there to have your back, it just infuriates me. I'm so sorry.
thank you everyone for listening to that.
This
Just the
is
moral
cheaper
of
than
the story.
therapy.
It really is. And we're more fun.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, but just to the point, you never know who can be affected by
That is my nightmare as a parent. That is my biggest fear.
drugs.
Yeah, because I have quote unquote good kids, as you know.
You
But
do.
I am not stupid. I know it could happen to anyone's child at any time. One of the things that I really thought a lot about during that overdose portion of that is my friend Sarah, who works in rehab, and she has long told me that I need to just get Narcan, and she recommends it to everybody who, period, but especially people who have young teenagers or young adult children, that they should just have their kids carry Narcan with them everywhere.
Oh yeah, for not only for themselves or somebody else, you just don't know.
Yeah.
And I think Narcan is one of the most amazing things out there. And I agree with you. It would not be a bad idea to make sure your kids have it. They might be around someone else and they could save their lives.
Yeah.
Great advice from
It's a
her.
miracle.
I am happy to say that I didn't hate Surgeon Lady in this episode. So see, characters are growing on me. I loved that it led to a really cool heart procedure, but the guy that came in with the thing why did he come in like a raging bull? That made no sense to me.
I thought that too. For quite a bit because it was super annoying. I was like, you better be glad I'm not your doctor because you'd be dead as a doornail, no pun intended. But I thought about it the third watching, and I bet if you ask your mom, I bet she will tell you that they had more patients than not that spent a great deal of the time that those people were trying actively to save their lives telling them how shitty their hospital was.
That's true. It just seemed so over the top.
Yeah, and I agree. It was super dramatic, and it very, very much felt like a Winky Fingers very special episode. Like sometimes with some of these things, you do feel a little bit like they're trying to get in every type of storyline
or stereotype that you get in the medical.
Right. But I'm betting that it's probably more common than not that you have to listen to. The part of your job as an ER doctor is to have to listen to how shitty your ER is. Everybody hates the ER. Everybody hates the ER.
I don't think it's limited to the ER either. I think because, Mom, there were patients in the VA.
Oh, the VA? Yeah.
They didn't want her being her nurse because she was Black. But there were instances when a different nurse would come in. My mom isn't anyone who's ever had to give blood, donate blood, or have blood drawn at the doctor's office. If you had to be stuck, my mom is the one you wanted to do it. She could find a vein, didn't even really exist. She was really, really good at it. And this man acted like this dude, but saying racial things. And that mom's like, all right, she called another nurse in, and this nurse couldn't get the stick. She couldn't get the IV in. And mom stood back in the door, and the guy was like, okay, she can try it. And of course, mom has to. She couldn't be like, nope, sorry. So she did it. And I think it taught that man a lesson because he was much kinder to her after that. So hopefully he learned not to be a judgmental bigot, but there are people like that, and not just in the ER is my point.
No. I think probably at least as many people are bitching at the VA hospital as are in the ER.
And sometimes it's warranted. The VA they really could do better for the veterans of our country.
But that's also true. Like there are a lot of things that happen in hospitals around the country in real world
scenarios. It's healthcare in general. Yeah.
Right. Like this is all these conversations we're having about intellectual conversations about, how inured do you have to be to other people's emotions? How compassionate do you have to be? This is all just like us talking about a TV show. The reality is doctors are human, and some ERs are better run than others. And I know that there have been several times that I've been cussing the service that I'm getting in an ER. Just side tip, one of the things I've noticed is start vomiting immediately and they will definitely get you back in a room. But I've never thought about it from the other's perspective of this is not, by and large, these are not things that the doctors can control. And I think if, knock on wood, I hope to God I never have to go back to another ER, but I definitely am going to think twice before I start bitching next time I go.
It definitely makes you think. And I can't wait to talk to our special guest next week.
That's gonna be
We'll get more into that later. I liked the STEM guy. I had to look up what STEM meant, which is basically a very bad heart attack. And I liked the back and forth between this guy and Dr. Robbie. He was refreshing. I mean, the guy is like a few minutes away from dying.
Yeah.
And he's still got a good
He's still joking.
sense of humor. And I like the way Dr. Robbie
That man was clearly a good 15, 20 years older than me. I don't appreciate them making him 52, but I did think he was very, very funny.
Thought that he was in his 50s.
Why don't you shut up, Becky? Because somebody isn't going to be 50 as soon as some other people are going to be 50, right? That's not what 50 looks like.
Well, you're beautiful.
Thank you. I agree.
And that guy was, he looked, I don't know. I did have an existential crisis when I turned 40. I'll never forget this. Real quick, I'm sorry. It's a funny story. I'm sitting in the car at Kroger waiting on Darren to get there for us to go grocery shopping. And you know me, I live in the 90s and I had my 90s playlist going. And it dawned on me that I was about to turn 40. My youth was gone. I was never going to get it back. And I was never going to feel or look like that ever again. And I broke down in the Kroger parking lot. But I try now, even with every age spot that pops up or something that just doesn't stand up quite like it used to, I try to remind myself that every year I get older is a year I'm still here. And that is something to celebrate.
For sure.
Try not to live in the past. And, there is a 20 beauty, there's a 30 beauty, there's a 40 beauty, there's a 50 beauty, and you are that 50 beauty.
Well, I appreciate that, but that man's like a 70 beauty. So
he was not 70. He did not look 70.
I refuse to believe that that's what we look like.
If anyone is listening, please share your thoughts on whether or not you think that guy looked like he could pass for 50.
We are not that old.
We are not.
Like I said, look at Noah Wiley. He's 53.
And he's hot.
He is very, he never was before. How did I not notice how tall he was?
Oh, yeah. And I love a tall dude.
I love a tall dude too. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Dr. McKay dropping some real shit about the kid with the list of names. I'm glad we circled back to that. I'm glad it just wasn't left out of the episode. And we got a little glimmer into her past because she mentions, Dr. Robbie's like, well, I don't want to ruin his life if they're wrong. And she's like, well, I don't want him to hurt anyone else because she's been on the wrong side of someone who hates women and it's not fun. So I just wrote a note here that we got a tiny little piece of her puzzle. So it's evident, looks like she was in an abusive relationship, but I'm still curious. I wonder if maybe she didn't take her ex out.
Yeah.
And that's why she has the ankle bracelet on.
I don't know, but I do think that was another example of what I was talking about earlier, where you see little glimpses of how Dr. Robbie is not exactly perfect and that maybe he's still being worked on by his own biases as well and may not realize it. Although he did seem very accepting when it was pointed out to him.
Yeah.
But I think that if a female doctor had been in charge of that situation, I feel like they would have immediately called the school for the most part.
Well, I'm glad that the social worker, Kiara, told him, when he brought up the idea of calling and saying that his mom's not doing well, would that be unethical? Which still, given today's current temperature with school shootings and things like that you even have to ask about it being ethical pisses me off. And I'm glad that she said in this situation, you need to do whatever's necessary.
Yeah, me too. And I honestly think, well, maybe I just want to hope that in a real world scenario, they would have immediately called the school when he ran out the building.
Yeah, that's what I'm believing in my head. So this brings me to my final main point before we go into chart notes. So I watched on first watch, I watched the scene where the ambulance was stolen, and I was like, why? What was the point in this? To show Dana smoking a cigarette? I don't get it at all. And then I was watching it the second time. Do you think it's possible that the troubled kid stole that ambulance? There has to be a reason that scene happened.
I don't know, because what I took, possibly, I hadn't thought about that, so I'll have to sit with that for a bit. I felt like two things. I felt like, one, it was to show that beyond just everything it was to bring the EMTs into the fold a little bit. One of the things, this is probably in your chart notes, so I don't want to jump ahead, but just when I was talking about how hard, a little bit of my difficulty of talking about this episode is that it wasn't so much just one little moment here or there that I could pick out. It was just this experience of the hospital being its own little environment. That one moment when they finally just coded the guy that was having the heart attack that Dr. Whitaker had been working on, and the lady that was the cleaning lady that was walking by, when she stopped and she took a moment, she heard the buzz and she knew what it was. It's showing that the hospital is more than just the patients and the doctors and it's a microcosm of all of these different humans coming together. And so I think partly it was to get the EMTs in the story to show that this is a rough neighborhood that they're in, and that sometimes
I didn't even think about that.
Violent things happen. But I also don't think you're wrong that part of it was to show Nurse Dana out there smoking a cigarette, which brings me to what I said I know you're going to get into who our guest is going to be next week. I'd like to talk to an actual nurse about something that I've noticed, two things, because I have a note here that's probably I hope it doesn't make you mad. I wrote down, Nurse Dana very well could have been an anti-vaxxer. And I say that because one of the things that I've noticed, and I have several nurse friends, the majority of them don't smoke cigarettes, they don't do vapes, they were very conscious of the reality of COVID and all of that. But there was a shocking number of nurses that used to stand outside until they made it illegal, up until the moment that they made it illegal for them to do it on hospital campuses. Even when Ava was born, nurses that would stand outside and smoke at the hospital. And then too, when COVID hit, I was so shocked at how many nurses I knew that did not believe in the COVID vaccine. Shocked the heck out of me. And one of my friends is a nurse practitioner in Dallas. She's a psychiatric nurse practitioner, but she kept quarantine better than anybody that I knew throughout the entire thing. And I mentioned that to her, and she was like, "You're crazy. That can't be true." But it was true. I'm not saying it's the majority of nurses. I'm just saying it was a shocking number. Like,
I was shocked too, seeing the news headlines of nurses because they couldn't come back to work unless they got vaccinated, and how many people were striking because they didn't want the vaccine.
That's just crazy to me. I have it was even in my doctor's practice, there were people, the nurses, that didn't want to quarantine. They kind of would say things under their breath about the masks and all this stuff. And my doctor is pretty conservative. He's a pretty conservative guy. I know he votes Republican, but he's been my doctor since I was 15. And I kind of picked his brain about it. And he's like, "No, it's real. It's real. It's frightening. It's killing people all over the place. You need to take it seriously." And I can't wait to talk to another, pick their brain about why that is, especially in the scientific or the medical field. I tend to trust the majority of experts because these people don't go to college for 8 years plus to learn to be the best in their field. We live in one of the most advanced times and one of the safest times in history as far as medical advancements go. They're working miracles every day. So it's shocking to me that there are that many people, even though it is definitely a minority, that don't trust science. But anyway, that's what I thought when I saw Nurse Dana out there smoking, is that she reminded me of some of those nurses.
All right. Well, if you don't have any other main points about the episode, I'd like to move into chart notes. We're running again a little long. Anything else?
No.
All right, chart notes. The letter Dr. Abbott wrote to Fiona, the daughter of the vet he lost, was absolutely beautiful. Yeah. And that was just a very sweet moment. I want to ask this to Wendy. Are vending machine scrubs a real thing?
They have to be.
That was really weird. And I think that whole part of that story could have been left out. I don't know if it was Winky Finger's levity to give Dr. Whitaker a laugh moment or what, but
I bet it is real because they probably have to keep track of how many scrubs that's a cost point thing in the
Yeah.
hospital, I'm betting. Before we move past the the sister reading or hearing the letter.
I thought it was his daughter.
No, I think that's his sister.
Oh, my bad.
And the reason I say that is because I noticed that, and it made me think about you and your brother. Like when she was there saying goodbye to him, very much made me think about you and Jason.
Oh. Perla explaining her pet philosophy. I thought that was just a funny quote. You ever try to flush a guinea pig? Try explaining that to your plumber.
That's funny.
The translator was super cool.
Yeah.
What an amazing piece of technology.
Very neat. When she touched Dr. Collins's belly there, that was like...
I've never been pregnant, but I
hated it.
A lot of friends who've been pregnant, and I never touched your belly without asking if I could touch your belly. And I know it was to highlight the fact that she's showing, but ooh, that made me cringe.
Yeah, but you know what? Before I had kids, I don't know that I didn't do that. I didn't realize how annoying or obnoxious it would be. You know, even if you're very happy to be pregnant, after a while, you start feeling like your body's not your own, and every conversation is about being pregnant, and it can be very frustrating. So yeah, I kind of cringed in that moment. Dr.
Collins and Robbie were cute. Again, he's talking about catches her on the rat, and then he's just being coy, bringing up the good-looking cop that she'd been talking to. I think he was trying to see if she was interested, because
for sure
if she would have remembered his name. And then she's like, yeah, stay in your lane. And he's like, no, I really did want to talk to him about something. They're adorable. I'm shipping him now. I like her.
I like her a lot too, but I'm telling you, I've just got this weird sneaking suspicion that he's married.
Stop.
I also had thought that he might be gay, and that maybe the baby's father is Uncle Doctor, who is definitely married.
Maybe he's bisexual.
I don't know, but
But did he? I definitely think
Myrna was calling him some gay slurs later on, which may just be the Alzheimer's.
Which is my final point, my final chart note. I don't know, because I feel like he really likes Dr. Collins.
But what if they're just friends and he's just like...
He wanted the cop's name to ask the cop out.
No, I don't think that. That's funny, though. No, I think maybe just looking out for her. I don't know. I feel like it's going to go one of two ways. Either he is the secret boyfriend and he's married, or he's not the secret boyfriend. They're just good friends and he's gay. But I don't know. We'll have to see. This is why I said I think they're planning some stuff in here that is going to come to fruition. But I also think they're throwing in some red herring, some things to try to make you go in one direction.
Dun, dun, dun.
Communism was just a red herring.
I just wrote this down, and it's absolutely inappropriate, but the man can't even find time to pee. And then Dr. Robbie says, fuck me. And I looked at my TV and I was like, be there in 10.
No, Beck. That was your chance. Let him pee first, though.
Oh, definitely. And wash your hands, please. I think Dr. Robbie is an ex-smoker. I think it was nicotine gum he grabbed out of the drawer while he was talking to Dana. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
I think that's a little something that we're going to learn about him.
Good Lord, I could not believe how much nicotine was in those pods.
Oh, that horrified me. I got a couple of my kids who vape, and I try to tell them nicotine, to stay away from it.
Yeah.
And knowing now, just watching them sit there, that stresses me out. My last chart note goes to the great Myrna. This time she murdered her husband, and Dr. Robbie asks, how did you do it this time? And she says, with the meat grinder. She put him in a meat grinder. And then she's trying to escape, and Dr. Robbie catches her. And he says, I put up with a lot around here. I take very good care of you, so you can call me Dr. Rabinovich, or you can call me Dr. Robbie. Or you can use my first name of Michael. But I do not appreciate you calling me fruitcake. Myrna. Oh, did I hurt your feelings, cocksucker? Just kiss. I love Myrna. She is my favorite character in this show.
And all of a sudden, fruitcake doesn't look so bad.
Right, yeah. So, anything else you want to add to chart note? All right. Well, my final thoughts, I thought they did a great job of closing out, or at least beginning the closeout of some storylines. A couple of meh moments that we talked about, but it didn't take away from what I thought was great about the episode. I think it was another good one. How about you?
I liked it a lot. I really did. I thought, again, I think a lot of why this episode went long was me trying to explain my feelings about, I think, a difference in the way that we see some of the personalities in the show, because I do have a lot of empathy for the ones that are saying and doing the awkward things that are obviously not the right thing to do or say in the moment. But just going through the day with them and seeing how many times a day you have to go from being empathetic to clinical as somebody who struggles with accessing their emotions, because I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole. So my defense mechanisms over the years have been to shut my emotions off a lot of times. And after a while, it's very difficult to go back and forth that way. That I really appreciated how they showed that nobody is really a monster in this show and no one is an angel. They're, other than maybe Dr. Mohan, she might be an angel. She might be a literal angel. But that was my biggest takeaway from this, is it made me think about emergency room care really in a way that I had never thought about it before, and the trauma that they go through all day long.
That's cool. Well, we did not get any feedback this episode. I know y'all are out there watching the show and hopefully listening to our podcast. So please, please, please drop us a line or two with some feedback. We'd greatly appreciate it. And to do that, you can email or send us a voice message as an attachment to what's on tonight 2@gmail.com. That's what's on tonight and the number 2@gmail.com. You can visit our Facebook page where there will be a post for the next episode. You can leave feedback in the comments section or send us a message through Facebook Messenger. We can be found on Instagram as well at What's On Tonight Podcast 2. We would greatly appreciate it if you leave a review, comment, and or share on your podcast listening app of choice. And a reminder that we are super excited that we are on Apple Podcasts. So let's move on to podcast recommendations and anything else that you would like to share, Mandy.
I don't have any podcast recommendations, but I'd like to apologize to any of our listeners out there for the third party in our podcast today, which is my insane dog, June. June is, I am her emotional support animal, and she is on high alert 24/7 to guard me from any conspicuous shadows that might be trying to get me, or dust bunnies, anything of that nature, the garbage men that come steal our trash every week. And she's very angry that I have kept her outside. And my husband had to run out for a minute. So she has been barking outside that door for the last hour and a half. Next week, we'll just have to figure something out. I'll go record in the closet or something, because poor June isn't. We
need to have her on one day. She can talk to us about mental health.
Oh, she needs to. I would have her in here with me, but the problem is that the moment that she so much as hears a mouse fart in the front yard, she is going to lose her mind and bolt out of here. So we got to figure out a happy medium. But anyway, that's June, guys. She can't help it.
I can be heard on Adrenaline Cinema podcast, Panels to Pixels podcast, and here on What's On Tonight podcast. As far as recommendations go, Podtastica continuing their coverage of Squid Game, and the podcasts are amazing. Jason and his variety of guests each week are really doing a great job of breaking down the psychologies of the games, and just great coverage. So make sure to check them out. And also Buffy and Angel rewatch is happening over on Still Slaying a Buffyverse podcast. They can be found on Podtastica under Still Slaying a Buffyverse podcast. Podcast I mentioned last week with Lark. That's your relationship name, Laura and Mark. Laura, Billy, and Mark covered Nosferatu with Adrenaline Cinema. I still haven't listened yet because I still haven't seen the movie, but it is getting some really great feedback. So if you watch that movie, go check that out. Want to give a giant thank you to Mark at Power Corp Entertainment for giving us this platform and all the time you give us to keep us going. Please visit the Power Corp website. It can be found on our Facebook page, and you can find our podcast as well as other podcasts like the Slaylound podcast with Billy and Will. I do believe there's going to be some new content coming out soon about from their podcast. You can also find out about other projects Mark is working on, so head over and check it out.
That wraps up our coverage of episode 3 of The Pit. We will be back next week where we're going to break down episode 4 titled 10 a.m.
We have a special guest with us next week, Wendy. Wendy works in the medical field, and I am super excited to get her perspective on this episode. And Mandy and I both look forward to talking with her, and I hope she's ready for all the questions we're going to throw at her. So looking forward to that. We want to take a minute and thank everyone for listening. I am Becky.
And I'm Mandy.
We will catch you next week when we grab the remote and see what's on tonight. Bye.
God dang it, June.